Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Perspective with me, Julie Ali. On today's show, we are going to be talking to two separate entities. We will be starting off by talking with Childline South Africa, and in the second half of the show, we'll be talking to the CEO of the Teddy Bear Clinic, and that, of course, is Dr. Shaheda, Omar. The show today is being approached with shock and horror, and rightly so. We are going to be talking about a hashtag justice for Cele. It's a story that has made headline news, but let us not think that Cele is the only child that has been subjected to the heinous act of possibly rape. These are situations that are playing out almost on a daily basis, not only in South Africa, but all around the world. There are horrible monsters and predators who eye our innocent children, and when they do have the opportunity, they use the opportunity and destroy not only the child's life, but the entire family structure then starts breaking down. So let's start off by talking with Childline, and we're going to talk about this horrible story that is playing out in South Africa, as I've indicated, and we'll also look at how we can go on protecting our innocent little darlings. On the show this morning, we will be talking with CEO at Childline South Africa, and that, of course, is you, Dumisile, Cele. A very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning to the viewers, and thank you for the opportunity.
Now, before we get to the heart of the matter of this horrible, heinous situation, let's understand who is Childline South Africa and what role do you play in protecting our children right across the country?
Yes, so Childline South Africa is a national NGO that focuses on issues of children's rights, child protection, and safety. So we have offices across the country, and our core intervention is based around our toll-free helpline, which is 116. So it is a free number, and this number is available 24/7. And its mandate really is that it is available for children, young people, or anyone who has a concern about a child in terms of the child who might be abused, at risk, in need of care. But also, we are available for children who just need someone to talk to about any matter that may be affecting them.
So Childline is driving this initiative, and rightly so. Hashtag justice for Cele. The movement continues. How and when did you get involved? And of course, how did the story break at Childline South Africa?
So Childline has really joined the multiple voices across the country when we all came to know of this matter regarding Cele. And our involvement, as I said, we've got offices across the country. We were part, or we also participated in the movement that took place in the Eastern Cape when the news broke of this child who was abused, and the community and the society at large was up in arms in terms of demanding justice for Cele. So this is how we got involved as Childline. But as you rightfully said, for us as Childline, it is reflecting that Cele is just but one of the thousands of children in our country who are exposed to this violence of abuse against them. Some do make it, and we get to hear of them through the media, but unfortunately, many and thousands of our children don't get their stories heard in this matter, but also their cases even go unnoticed.
How does something so horrific happen, very especially in spaces that are meant to be safe spaces, like at a school? We also understand that there were a couple of perpetrators, allegedly, that were suspects in this case. For people who haven't heard about what exactly happened to Kwekwe and at this Bergview College in the Eastern Cape, can you give us a bit of context, please?
So the context as we know it is that the matter or the abuse of this young person took place in October 2024. And the story as it unfolds, it is through the parents who noticed that there was something not going accordingly with the child. And the child then spoke to them, and they then took the child to the necessary authorities for medical care and attention. As the country at large, we then became fully aware of the status and what had happened only in 2025. And this was really because the parents felt that the system was not moving and that the necessary action was not taking place in order to move the case forward and ensure that there was justice for this young child. What we know is that there has not been any arrest to date, and that the people that are spoken about, the police are calling them people of interest. So we don't even know if there are suspects in the matter, but we know that there are people that the police are interested in them regarding the abuse of this child. And that really is far as we know regarding the context and what has happened to the child. And obviously, through the media, we've heard of the DNA issues, which really I do not think it is my space to go into those, as the police are managing and will be in a better position to give feedback to that. But also, just going back to your point where you are asking, how can this horrible, horrible situation happen to our children, particularly in environments where they are supposed to be safe? So, as Childline, working in the space of child abuse, where we also offer therapy to children who have experienced trauma and we support them through the court processes, we know that abuse unfortunately happens in places where children are supposed to be safe. Our children in South Africa are usually, or in most cases, abused by those known to them, people who are supposed to be trusted by children and those who are supposed to provide care and protection. So our children in South Africa are in really a very terrible state, and as a country, we are letting our young one and our future generation down.
Sad to say that we are told over and over again that children invariably are abused by people known to them, uncles, brothers, fathers, friends, grandparents, neighbors, etc. And I guess that is the reason why the cases go unreported, because the family wants to protect themselves against the shame. But I don't think they really understand the psychological trauma that the child is undergoing. And in this particular instance regarding Kwekwe, I'm kind of wondering if a situation like this does present itself again. It happens all the time. Kwekwe is one of the lucky ones that was, there's interventions in place. She is receiving the necessary support, psychological and otherwise. But what should be happening the moment the authorities or parents realize this child has been abused? What are the first necessary actions to be taken to make sure the child is safe mentally, physically, and more importantly, emotionally?
So I think for parents, caregivers, or anyone that the child will disclose this matter to, it is critically important that you trust the child. So, as the person who has been spoken to, you are not there to investigate the matter or find out the truth. It is important that you believe the child. And the first thing that you need to do is to contact your local police and report what has happened. That is critical because the police will then take the child and yourself to, for example, the Tutuzela Care Center or a place where the child would receive the required medical care. So the medical attention is very important. And at the Tutuzela Care Center, and I am obviously clear that they are not available throughout the country, but when you go to the police, they will ensure that they transport you to the nearest center. So you
Okay.
are able, or
Can
the
I
child.
stop you there,
Yes.
please? Can I stop you? I'm so sorry. Let's go for an ad break, and when we come back, you can pick up from where you've left off. Welcome back. We're talking about justice for Cele. The moment and movement continues. Our guest is CEO of Childline South Africa. She is, of course, Dumisile Cele. Welcome back, Dumisile, and do you want to pick up from where you left off?
Yes, so it is important that you report to the police, which then will ensure that you are presented at the Tutuzela Care Center. In that institution, you will be able to get medical care. There are social workers in that context. There are nurses in that context, but also police. So it is a center where a child will be able to get all the required support. And obviously, we know that those centers are not available everywhere in the country. So, in some instances, as a caregiver, you may find that you probably are not even able to access the police. So, you can go to your social worker or even present at your local clinic because they will then be able to show you or take you to the appropriate centers. And we also know that as a parent or as a caregiver, sometimes when the child talks to you about what has happened, it really creates confusion and you may not even know where to start. So we encourage the community to phone Childline. Our number is 116, it is free. At least you'll be able to talk to a counselor who will then be able to calm you down, because that is very important, and then explain what you need to do under those circumstances.
Undoubtedly, when you find yourself in a situation like that, you are so horrified and traumatized by what the child is telling you. Sadly, also, some parents dismiss it and think that the child has an overactive imagination. But I think when a child does come to a parent and present a story such as this to them, we as parents need to take the matter seriously. And as you've rightly said, if you're uncertain about anything, pick up the phone, 116, which is a free call, talk to Childline, and they will be able to guide you. It may just be that the child does have an overactive imagination, but you'll only be able to establish that once the child has been in contact and has spoken with a social worker. Now, I do know you are Childline South Africa, Dumisile, and I know that you can't talk on behalf of SAPS, but we do know that justice delayed is justice denied. And sometimes SAPS do not serve us well. There's ongoing delays, they're overworked, overstretched, and sometimes the file gets lost, or there just isn't enough intention and motion involved in a case like this. What do you suggest should be happening? What should we be doing?
You know, Julie, it is really a terrible situation where we find ourselves. And I agree with you that sometimes SAPS does not serve us well. And you can imagine where a child has to wait for months before the matter goes to court. So practically what we are saying is that that young child, that little one, must remember everything that happened to them for over a period of 12 months, because, or even more, because when they go to court, they have to relay exactly what happened to them. So we are not giving them an opportunity to move on. We're not giving them an opportunity to heal. So when you think of the long-term consequences of that, it is really very traumatic. So I think as a community, and what has happened with the matter of Twekwe, where the country has stood up and said enough is enough, we need to continue. And we have said this is just but one of the cases that are happening in our country. We need to stand up and we need to speak up for our children. And as I always say, it also starts right at the beginning, where as community members, we must report. I think we must not lose hope. We must report, because in most cases, it's only us as neighbors who will ensure that each child is protected. So we need to stand up for children in our country, report, and demand justice, and that matters are done and dealt with appropriately.
Absolutely. You raised a very important question there, and that is the trauma, the ongoing trauma that the child then experiences, because the case might be delayed for months on end because of the backup at all the different courts. And you also said this child is expected to remember the events. That's an added trauma to the child as well. So I would suggest, and I hope you agree with me here, is when the child starts reporting what has happened to him or her, because it's not only girl children who are abused, boy children are abused as well, is parents should record the events. Just take out your cell phone and record everything, so that when the child has to appear in court, everything is recorded. You can play it to the child once again. He or she will recall all of those events, as traumatic as it is for that child. It's important that the facts are relayed as initially stated to you as a parent or a caregiver. Now I want to move on to something else, and we do know that South Africa, regarding the rights of a person's privacy, we are protected by those rights through the POPI Act. But Childline and other such organizations are asking for images of personal information about Twekwe does not get passed on. We're all very crazy about social media, and we want to be the first to break sensational news. Tell us why it is, apart from the POPI Act, why is it not a good idea to have these pictures and these stories circulating and going viral, for that matter?
Thank you, Julian. That is really important for us, because we are talking about a child who still has the rest of her life to live and try to live a normal life, of course, following what has happened to her. So what we are saying is, can you imagine that child 10 years down the line, if she puts her name on the internet, the story will pop up. If she grows up and is looking for employment, her story will pop up. And even as young as she is, if she's walking around the neighborhood, going to the shops, because people would have seen her face, they would be pointing at her. So it means even the attempt to lead and try to have a normal life as we will have it on a day to day and get on about our business, we are making it very difficult for this child. So we are not saying we shouldn't be talking about what has happened, but we are cautioning the community about sharing her picture or images of the child, because we are also just adding on the trauma and not giving her an opportunity to lead a normal life. She didn't ask this to happen to her. She didn't call this upon herself. And she really requires a sense of privacy so that when the storm has passed, if it will ever pass, she can at least try to have some sort of a normal life as a young person and as a human being growing up in this country.
Very quickly, we're going to be wrapping up in a minute or two. I understand that the school that Cele was attending, without even consulting with the parents, gave the parents transfer documents for the child to be placed at another school. How do you view that? Do you believe that is in the best interest of the child? Or do you think consultation should have happened before that action was taken by the school?
I think consultation should have happened because, you know, one of the things that we talk about is that it is important for the child to have some sort of normality in their lives when they have experienced trauma. So it is important that the parents should have been consulted. The child herself should have been consulted so that a proper and appropriate decision is made, other than the sense that they were just fobbed off or being removed out of the school without their permission or even considering if it is the right thing to do or if it is in the best interest of the child. Consultation, communication is critical because one assumes everyone is involved in the upbringing, the care, and protection of a child at home and in their school environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I'm just thinking, in the child's mind, she's thinking she's being further punished by being moved to another school. Give her the opportunity to make that decision. And that's where we leave it. Thank you indeed to you, CEO at Childline South Africa. And you are, of course, Dumisile Cele. Thank you for your insights in this matter and keep up the great work. Do remember that magical number, 116. It's a free number. If you have any issues, any concerns about a child being abused, this is the number to call. Thank you once again. God bless. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back to the second part of our show. This time around, we're talking with Dr. Shaheda Omar. She is the clinical director at the Teddy Bear Foundation. And we're talking to her because earlier on we spoke with Childline about justice for Cele, and we do know there are millions of Cele's all around the world. So with Dr. Shaheda Omar, we're going to be looking at body boundaries and brave conversations, teaching children to protect themselves. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Shaheda Omar. Welcome to the program. Great to have you on the show.
Alaikum salam and shukran dalilan for this opportunity.
Okay, you are obviously the right person to be talking about these issues. We know that the country was outraged when we heard the story about Cele, but that's not the only, that's a reported case. There are hundreds of thousands of unreported cases of child abuse. What do you believe are some of the subtle signs that caregivers and parents, even teachers for that matter, should be looking out to indicate that this child might be a victim of abuse?
Well, I think if you use the word subtle, and it's always, I think, important to understand that things are not obvious. It's not always obvious. It's not always overt. One expects behaviors to be overt or an overt manifestation of children displaying inappropriate, age inappropriate, or other behavioral disorders. So it's also looking out for slight changes in a child's behavior. If a child starts suddenly losing attention, their concentration span seems to be waning, but it's not just an isolated incident, but it persists. And over a period of time, that seems to grow in intensity. So there's an increase in duration, the frequency, the severity. So that could impact on the child's academic performance, but also listening to instructions that have been conveyed by significant others, whether it's educators, caretakers, parents, where the child fails to respond timeously and appropriately. So those are subtle things that one needs to look out for. But also when a child loses interest in things that the child previously enjoyed or participated, and there seems to be no zest or joy to be that the child previously, they enjoyed certain programs, even on television or even their game stations, where the child suddenly is not just interested in those kind of things. You see the child becoming more and more silent, withdrawn, isolated, not wanting to engage with the family, um, sitting in one corner or sitting in the room, or also sitting on one's devices all the time. It's also a withdrawal and isolating oneself from people around him or herself. So, these are subtle things which are not always, obvious to the naked eye. And I think, Julie, just in response to that, I've said this to you before, we've had this conversation that we do not look at these symptoms in isolation. We look at it in context. And of course, looking at a cluster of symptoms. So it's very easy to rush and attach a label to say this child has been victimized or a victim of abuse. There might be other underlying reasons that may contribute to that. So therefore, it is important to look at it in context, but also that we need to look out for other behaviors, the child's engagement with other children, the child's dietary patterns. Have they changed? Is the child eating suddenly a lot more? The child stopped eating, their sleeping patterns in relation to recurrent nightmares, sleepwalking, or sleeping a lot. And something that is subtle, and Julie, I find that that's where we often overlook the importance of that, is that some children, in order to assume a sense of power and control, their academic performance is actually going to excel. It's a form of sublimation, taking back some power and control that I'm feeling hopeless and powerless. And of course, they start working even harder, becoming obsessive about their schoolwork, and the child excels. So as far as the caretaker, the parent or guardian is concerned, my child is okay. Look how well he or she is performing at school. They continue to excel. So the underlying reasons are not always obvious. And this is what I want to alert to the viewers, that always look out for changes in your child's behavior, something that wasn't there before. You suddenly see that it's now becoming more prevalent, and we always err on the side of caution. I always say to parents, rather be neurotic, eccentric, than become more complacent and this. It's okay. boys will be boys, girls will be girls. So that kind of attitude, rather, the rule of thumb is to err on the side of caution. So check it out with a mental health professional. Julie mentioned that, she spoke to Childline earlier. Now that's a 24-hour toll-free line. So certainly reach out to that platform and see, or other professionals, to see that I'm not sure, what should I do? Yesterday I was engaging with a family, and the mother was concerned about her child, and she said the child refuses to go for therapy. And I said to the mother, well, then you need to actually take the first challenge and actually go and see a mental health professional
Wow.
to see how you can cope with managing your child. So it's, there are so many different ways of addressing it, but always be on the lookout for children's changes in behavior. I mean,
So,
I can go on.
I know there's so much to cover and not enough time. Shaheda, what I worry about, and you best placed to answer this question, is, and I think when a child is abused and violated, whether it's an adolescent or an older child, a preteen, or possibly even a teen, do you think that the teen or the preteen is a little better able to deal with the situation and would reach out for help? One thing you mentioned, and that is so worrying, is the child then becomes an overachiever. And that's when we as parents take our eye off the ball, don't we? Instead of trying to fathom or trying to ask, or perhaps say, I'm so proud of your achievements, but how do you start that discussion with your child to say, but I am worried you're working way too hard, or what's going on that you're pushing yourself so hard?
And I think it's that what you've raised is so important. I think we as caretakers and parents, I wouldn't say neglect or become negligent about that, but it's an oversight, regardless of whether your child is performing or not. The approach or the way one should be engaging with the child on a daily basis and consistently, I always say consistency is key to the mental health of any child and family, because there is no health when there is no mental health. So it's actually exploring with the child, on a daily basis. They, what was your highlight? What was the low light? What was, fun for you today? What was not so fun for you today? I think just exploring and looking, not only or listening to the responses that are elicited, but also looking at the body language. So sensitizing oneself to how the child is responding, what are the verbal saying and what are the non-verbal saying. And this is, a way of actually checking in and checking out, that are things okay with my child, because a parent knows. And I think it's easier for a parent to go into denial mode and say, but my child's great, look how well he or she's doing, high sports achiever as well. And I think those are the things that one should actually put more effort and invest in, where you start engaging, dialoguing with your child on a daily basis. And if the child refuses to speak, to say to your child, oh, this is what happened to me today. This was, this made me very sad, or this made me feel awkward. I was distressed by this. So what are you doing? You are opening the window of opportunity, creating that permission to say, look, I'm human. I also experience, different feelings, different emotions, and it is difficult for me as an adult to navigate those emotions. So the message conveyed to the child that it's okay to feel what he or she is feeling, but here a safe platform is being created. And I think that's important, Julie, for for parents and families to understand, is that the child needs to feel that this is a safe space, because often they are afraid to reach out because they're not sure if they're going to be validated, they're going to be received in a favorable manner. And I mean, that is why many children do not come forward to reach out for help. And home is supposed to be the place of hope. So that is what you need to reach out and provide, that sense of hope, and create that sense of trust that I'm here no matter what, regardless of what you feel or you want to say. I will be here for you.
Okay, Shaheda, we've got to go for an ad break. When we come back, I also want to look at the issue around shame and guilt. Oftentimes, the child carries a lot of shame, but also carries guilt. They second guess themselves and think, I probably provoked the person to abuse me. So they carry a lot of that guilt. So we need to talk about how we help that child get over the trauma of the shame and the guilt. But all of that right after the ad break. Welcome back. Body boundaries and brave conversations, teaching children to protect themselves, is what we're talking about with Dr. Shaheda Omar, Clinical Director at the Teddy Bear Foundation. Welcome back, Shaheda. I posed a question, or I made a comment just before the ad break, but added to that, shame and guilt. And I'm wondering about just how vulnerable is this child to future abuses? He or she's been abused in the past. They hopefully go for counseling. But how vulnerable are they in the future?
So, Julie, we need to look at often children are made to feel that it is their fault. They are blamed, they are named, they are shamed by the perpetrator. That is the modus operandi, where there's intimidation, coercion, threats, and as I said, blaming the child, where the victim then takes responsibility for all that has happened to the victim. Of course, internalizing that and assimilating that this is my fault, I'm responsible for what has happened, the typical damaged goods syndrome, that I'm worthless, I'm unworthy of love. And of course, in order to assume the sense of power and control, we find one of the dynamics playing out is that the child will then repeat this cycle of abuse. How does that happen? Where in the child's mind, this cognitive distortion that I will stop it, I will prevent it. Unfortunately, they find or gravitate themselves into situations or settings where they are more likely to be victimized and unable to actually stop it.
Sure.
And I think that's a pattern that we often see playing itself out, often becoming, the repeated victimization, that pattern of victimization, but sometimes also initiating victimization. And I think that is something that we also need to understand and be sensitive to, because we find that we are often labeling children as bad and mad and not understanding the sadness underlying these unmet emotional needs, unresolved conflicts that children are faced with. But I also want to speak to the sexual abuse accommodation syndrome, where why do children continue allowing themselves to be abused? Here you can see that the eroding of boundaries, where we find with pedophiles, they lure the grooming process, where they lure children, enticing children with so much attention. The preferential focus on the child makes the child gravitate towards that individual. And of course, boundaries are slowly eroded, and it becomes more and more difficult for the child then to refuse further engagement, where the person asks for images, photos, and it becomes more intrusive and invasive. So firstly, the lack of resistance, then unable to refuse. And when the boundaries are finally violated, although the child doesn't enjoy it, realizes this is not appropriate, this is not right, it doesn't feel okay, it becomes difficult for the child. And then you find the child starts accommodating, that typical accommodation syndrome, where the child now dissociates himself or herself from the actual abuse. They become numb and they allow it to perpetuate itself and repeatedly. So, and often the question asked is, but it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, and you allow this to repeat itself. Unfortunately, this is what happens. It's not because children are deliberately or purposefully wanting the abuse to repeat itself. It's because of this process, and because they see themselves as bad, ugly, dirty, and unworthy of any kind of approval, affection, or respect. And that is what we are seeing often occurring. And children are then seen to be, rather than seen to be the victims, are actually seen to be perpetrators. Like, but it's your fault. You made it happen. You didn't stop. Why? You had enough opportunities. You never came forward to make a disclosure. And we know the reasons for disclosure, not making a disclosure. It is a huge challenge. It's not something that's a single event, it's a process. And some children may disclose, like we talked about safe spaces, and some children may never disclose.
So these children that you're talking about, they just get caught, they trapped in this psychological game in their own heads, and they think they're worthless, and they think that they deserve being treated this way. What age group are we looking at? And I'm also wondering, Shaheda, when they reach possibly 18 and beyond, it's that time in their lives when they are able to make decisions. They are able to make safe decisions about their own safety and the choices that are going to be safe and work for them. Are they able then to break away, or would this need ongoing psychological intervention and support?
So it's different. Each child is different, and their responses may be different. The way they assimilate things, so the internalizing and then, of course, externalizing that behavior. So their behavioral repertoires will change from child to child. But you asked about the ages. It could be, we're finding children as young as 10 where they go into that sexual abuse accommodation syndrome, where they just allow it and they open themselves up to it. They just go when the perpetrator's around, they actually just make themselves available. I think that's the correct word to use. So, the ages could be from already your prepubescent child right up to adolescence. And your question around the 18-year-old or even a younger child, but the child reaching that stage or level of development and maturity, is it going to stop? Does the child have more power and control? Is the child in a position to stop it from continuing? Unfortunately, it's not always possible. If the child has not received psychosocial support, therapeutic interventions, the child may then continue spinning this web of abuse, and unfortunately would also find himself or herself in relationships that are abusive later on. Because with your adolescence, you find what we are seeing a lot of is gender-based violence, engaging in domestic relationships, intimate relationships, where they continue to be violated, and in some cases become the violators themselves. So I just wanted to, paint that landscape so that people can see, how it impacts on victims of child abuse and how they perpetuate the cycle of violence. And then we also see the intergenerational patterns of violence, but we are also seeing children and adolescents who have had a history of victimization are engaging and violating their age mates, their peers, even young children, violating sexual violations against their friends, their peers, and with adolescents as well.
And sadly, they seem to think that that is okay simply because they've been so heinously abused, and they think it's okay, and then they go on, like they said, the saying goes, hurt people, hurt other people. Sad indeed. Shaheda, when do we start these conversations with our children? The safe touching, the unsafe touching? What sort of language do we use without scaring the child? What are those, what do those conversations look like, and at what stage and age do we start preparing our children?
So it's really very important. I know it's awkward for many parents, but unfortunately, one has to brave oneself and speak to children the moment they develop vocabulary. So when do you start talking to a child of 2 and above? When bathing the child, dressing the child, taking the child to the toilet, I'd get the child to identify their body parts from head to toe. Starting from the front and going to the rear. And so starting with the head, with the eyebrows, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the lips, the tongue, the teeth, and ask to identify the different parts and what do you do with each of those parts. So starting with the non-sexualized body parts, coming to the sexualized body parts, and again, speaking to the different functions of the different parts of the anatomy of the body, and using what you said. How do we use, what language do we use? So using age-appropriate language, but the terms of references are not to use a cuckoo and the nunu and all of that. You say a vagina is a vagina. The child will slowly learn that. The penis, and I'm sorry, I have to use these terms of references because that is how we need to speak to our children and speak with our children and make them aware that those are parts of the body that we usually cover. We don't expose it to anybody outside. And of course, during specific times, if those body parts are exposed, it's usually during bathing time, going to the toilet, or if the child has to be medically examined, etc. So having those conversations, it might seem, no, it's too much for a 2.5-year-old. No, it's definitely not. And to say that if anybody touched you here, what do you need to do? I know it's putting a lot of pressure on a child, but we need to start having these conversations and saying to the child, showing a child what a pinch, what a push, what a shove feels like. Is it okay? Is it not okay? Is that a safe touch? Is that not a safe touch? When do you hug somebody? When do you shake hands? So starting with the basics, with the fundamentals, and moving to more sort of serious things, and explaining to the child that if it doesn't feel right, and if anybody else does come close to you and wants to touch you, that child needs to come and tell the caretaker, the caregiver. But you mentioned about little children, but I think we also need to look at our older children who are engaging online. The online sexual exploitation is so large, it's so
Absolutely.
huge, and the consequences and the implications are devastating. So that's something that we also need to look at online and offline. And people often are, I think that they just sort of feel that if their child is at home and is sitting online, their child is safe. Actually, that's not always the case. What we're seeing of child trafficking and children being exploited sexually, thinking that these age mates they're communicating with, unfortunately, that's not the reality. We're seeing a lot of predators out there luring children online as well. So parents
And
need to have these
unfortunately,
conversations.
Shaheda, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. But thank you indeed for your insights. Go well. Salaam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And there we were with Dr. Shaheda Omar talking about body boundaries and brave conversations, teaching children to protect themselves. From me, Julie Ali, till the next time, as always, Assalamu alaikum.